I'm Mike from futurethinkers.org. We discuss quite a range of topics, from technology to society to consciousness, and one of the jobs I've really taken upon myself in the last few years is to figure out what it is about society and about individuals that needs to change in order to have a better future. So we try and envision what the future is going to look like. And one thing that keeps popping up in a lot of the books I'm reading is this concept of anti-fragility. So show of hands, who has heard this term anti-fragility? Okay, how many of you have read Nissim Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile? Okay, cool. So I will just briefly go over this. I had slides here to kind of help me through this. So anti-fragility is the property of systems that increase in capability, resilience, or robustness as a result of stressors, shocks, volatility, noise, mistakes, faults, attacks, or failures. So it gets better as it is challenged. Now, there are a few ways this exists in nature. Evolution is like this. We don't evolve if we don't have pressure to evolve. If we don't have challenge in the environment, we won't evolve. Same thing with our immune systems. I read in this book, Coddling of the American Mind, that if we were to give small amounts of crushed peanuts and put it in our children's food as they're growing up, we would eliminate peanut allergies within a generation. But instead, we choose to avoid things. We avoid things that make us scared or that we perceive to hurt us, and what we end up doing is making things worse over time. So, just to give you a definition of what the difference is between fragile, robust, anti-fragile. Fragile is obviously a thing that breaks if it is pushed, harmed, challenged, anything like that. Robust is something that can resist and maintain its structure. And then anti-fragile, again, is something that benefits with time or with challenge. So another thing on Future Thinkers that I've been thinking a lot about is what type of stressors and environments create the kind of people that we want to create to have a better and more positive future. And I came across this saying in my research that goes as follows here. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. So it's a cycle. Does everyone understand that?
You just have to get rid of men.
Yeah.
Women should take over.
It's funny you say that, actually, because this is kind of a funny narrative that's happening in the West right now that I've noticed, that masculinity is being looked down upon and kind of being really torn apart. And I think it's a little misguided. There are a lot of startups, a lot of companies, a lot of movements out there that are trying to criticize masculinity and not really understanding what the positive forms of masculinity are. Protection, leadership, willingness to face adversity, willingness to go out there and cover new ground, pioneer. These are things that, by overly feminizing men, we are removing this kind of possibility of exploration, protection, challenge. And I think this is a narrative that's become very common that I would like to see go away. So one aspect of what I want to cover here is that technology, all the things that we're working on, all the things that we invent, end up creating a more comfortable environment. So we increase efficiency. You know, when we had heat, water, electricity, we were able to create a warm environment. I was just thinking about this last night in my Airbnb, how cold it is outside, how awesome it is at home in a blanket on, you know, playing video games or whatever, and how that would not exist a few hundred years ago. I'd be out there in the elements. However, I would be stronger. If I had to face the elements all the time, I'd be much stronger. I would probably have more hair. Which I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but less people die nowadays, but we get weaker over time. And actually what ends up happening is, well, that's pretty much it. We do get weaker over time if we don't create the stressors that we need to improve. Environmental pressure is critical to strengthen a species. Without it, we are unable to evolve. So what things do we do that make us fragile? Well, there is that, what I just said, discouraging or shunning masculinity and competition. I don't know if you guys have seen that Gillette ad that just came out that just basically tore men apart for being men. There's a few things about that I think they're very true and accurate about, but the way they portrayed that is not to show men what is possible, where they could move, but really to just tear them down. There is, I don't know if you guys have heard about the controversy with Patreon. Show of hands. Okay, great. Patreon decided to censor this guy named Assad, what's his name? Arkan of Assad or something like this. And he's kind of this like right-leaning guy who talks about some controversial things. And they censored him and kicked him off Patreon because he made some mention of Nazis in some way that actually was making fun of them. Nothing positive about it, but he brought this up in a conversation, not on his channel, and Patreon removed his only income source. So as we're creating platforms that are very financially based, I think it's extremely important that we don't build in the kind of switches to be able to cut people out. Obviously, cryptocurrency really prevents that from happening. But when we're building platforms and we have ourselves out in the open and we're vulnerable to that kind of social pressure to push us to make changes based off of censorship of speech, we're doing a disservice to people, whether they're calling for this or not. We're doing a disservice to a lot of people. Another thing we do that makes us fragile is we tell young people that they are fragile and need protection from controversial ideas. This happens all the time in colleges and universities all across the Western world. Safe spaces, trigger warnings, we've all heard about these things. Universities are meant to challenge our ideas, not to coddle us, not to make us safe. And this whole idea of safe spaces is preposterous. It's, even the hair in the back of my neck, just, I hate this. Universities are meant to challenge us. So what does this have to do with decentralized governance? Well, we need to build platforms of the future that promote individuals and societal anti-fragility. We need an open and decentralized internet. We should not be building platforms that allow us to cave into public pressure that promotes fragility, such as Patreon. How much time do I have left? Minute 40.
1 minute, 40 seconds.
Okay. So there's one more thing I want to really quickly cover. Do you guys know how ants communicate? Have you ever heard of this property called stigmergy? What it is the, well, I should probably read the definition of this. It's a mechanism of indirect coordination through the environment between agents or actions. So it's the organizational principle behind what Yuvi talked about, which is collective consciousness. It allows for a new emergent intelligence to form based off of the interactions of these agents with the environment. Now, what I'm proposing is that in order to create good times that create strong people, we need to build anti-fragility into our environment. We need to create opportunities for us to be challenged and grow and come across ideas that we don't agree with. And because we're making technologies that make our lives better and easier, we're continuing on this path of comfort, and we have to do things like allow for healthy competition, embracing uncertainty and conflict especially, not building censorship into our platforms, not sheltering our children from the world, instead pushing them out into the world, and building environments that are stigmergic for anti-fragility, that have elements of healthy gamification and competition. So, for example, if you go to the gym, you lift weights, you're hurting your muscles. You're literally tearing your muscles, but then they build and heal over time. Team sports and video games, and that's what my presentation is about. Yuvi, let me play more video games.